Namaste and in Lak'ech, and welcome to this episode of One World in a New World. I'm your host, Zen Benefiel, and this week's guest is a phenomenal man. His name is Dr. Elia Gourgouris. He is a coach, author, and speaker on happiness, positive leadership, and well-being. He is the author of a #1 Amazon best-selling book, 7 Paths to Lasting Happiness, as well as 7 Keys to Navigating a Crisis, a practical guide to emotional dealing with pandemics and other disasters. He's president of the Happiness Center and founding partner at the Global Institute of Thought Leadership. His motto, happiness is a choice. Isn't that wonderful? And it's led him to becoming a leading authority in happiness and corporate wellness, and a high demand speaker at conferences and universities around the world. And over the last 25 years, he's helped thousands of people to find happiness and fulfillment in their lives. Elia, great to have you here. This is going to be a wonderful conversation.
It's wonderful to be here. Thank you for that introduction. And I'm excited to share some thoughts with you and have a wonderful conversation, which I'm sure we will.
Absolutely. So, my guests always have some kind of interaction early on in life, or maybe not so early on, where they just develop or discover that there is an inner life that's available that most of us don't know about, let alone explore. And when they do, they find great rewards in doing so, although it doesn't necessarily fit with their localized environments and family and relationships around them. So you'd mentioned, and I doing a little research on you prior to, you had a conversation with your grandfather just before his passing, that he left you with some indelible, tasty tidbits. So let's kind of start there and see where we go from there.
Thank you. So I was born in Athens, Greece, and until I was 10 years old, and then we moved to Santa Monica in Southern California, and then was raised there for the rest of the time and did all my schooling and UCLA and all that other stuff. But when I was 5 years old in Athens, my grandpa pulled me aside, and his name is Elia, so I carry his name and I honor his name. And he was a gentle, wonderful human being. He's just, what I remember from him is just gentleness, sweetness, and just love. So, and he died when I was 6, so it's not like I have a lot of memories from him. But
I'm curious, if I may interrupt for just a moment, the etymology of Elia, what does that mean?
Elias, which is the Greek, in the Bible, it's Elias, it's the prophet. It's the prophet Elias, or Elias in Greek. So it's a so
fitting.
It's actually very fitting, because I've had a lot of prophetic things happen in my life where I've a lot over the years. Anyway, back to
your grandpa.
So he pulled me, and I'm going to translate. He said it in Greek, obviously, to me. He pulled me aside and sat in his lap, and he says, "My boy," says, "if you want to be the richest man in the world, do something good for somebody else every day, and you will be the richest man in the world." Now, as my 5-year-old little brain, initially, I took that. I thought richest man in the world, he meant with money, because Scrooge McDuck, like Disney, like, well, you're gonna have
Oh yeah,
But
we often confuse the two, right?
Of course, but over time, and because I've always been a people-centered, I have a big heart. I love big. And my wife of 33 years, she says, how do you love so many people? And it's endless.
It is.
It's something that I've always had inside of me, and I live it. I like it. I never get tired of it. So for me, acts of kindness, helping other people, starting from your own immediate family, extended family, friends, clients, patients, when I was a clinical psychologist and so on, it really comes easy to me.
Do you think it's more of a natural
It is, for me,
being that we all have, that's kind of programmed out of us as we grow older and
except that it wasn't
conflicted by the world?
Yeah, except that it wasn't programmed out of me, though. That's the thing. I think, and it was very, it was supported by family.
Lucky soul you were, and are.
People that have known me for decades, I'm like, yeah, I'm the happiness doctor, but really, people say, is he like that behind the scenes? Never mind the persona you see. If you ask people that I've known decades, I've been this way since I was a young kid. In spite of tragedies, and in
Mhm.
spite of the difficulties and the ups and downs,
Well, it helps you get through them, doesn't it? When you have that kind of nurturing spirit for yourself first, I know you mentioned self-love in some of your talks, then you can give to others freely and not be disturbed about what's going on around you because you're just not, it's not that you're oblivious to it, it's that you don't allow it into your space to affect you emotionally.
and we talked earlier, I had psychic experience when I was young and out of body experience when I was young on my own. And my parents didn't even know about it. But they scared me. And I remember when I was 15 years old, I made a conscious, this was in Santa Monica in California. I made a conscious decision to say this power, or even the prophetic, of knowing things. I knew things before they would happen.
Hmm.
Scared me. And I made a conscious, and I remember this. I remember talking to God actually, and I'm like, you know what? This power is too much for me. I can't handle it. So I'm going to walk away from it. But there will come a time in my life that I'm going to return to it. What's really interesting is that I'm back to where I was back then. After 40 years I passed, and I'm back, but I can handle it now. Back then I
Rhythms
was,
and cycles
yeah,
of life, right?
I got scared when I was young. I couldn't handle it. It was too much
Oh,
for me. And
sure.
people couldn't
Well, it's
understand what I was
freaky.
going through.
It's
Right.
freaky. I know when I first had mine, I was 7. I'd been out playing with kids in the neighborhood, came back, was tired, laid on my bed, closed my eyes. All of a sudden, I feel this really high-pitched sensation in my body, and I feel like I'm starting to lift up. And I'm like, oh shit, am I dying? Right? And then the voice I was telling you about earlier says, just relax, take a breath, and let go. It's okay.
I didn't have that though. You were like that. You had that. What I had in my mind, because even when you leave your body, your mind still works. I mean, it's
Oh
like
yeah.
I was told, like if this is back in the day before
Hmm.
cell phones, of course, that if you left your body and the phone rang, the landline basically, that your spirit would get scared and take off, and then you would wake up dead, basically, in essence. Well,
Oh
I
sure.
know, but I was a kid. I didn't know any better. So
Oh
when I
sure.
left and I
Yeah.
saw this, I remember that I'm like, I got to get back to my body as quickly as possible so that before the phone rings. So that's what happened.
Well, I did that. I have a chance. I had popped out of my body. I was on the ceiling looking at my body, and then I started thinking and immediately popped back into my body. Because
Exactly.
in that state, it's a state of just allowing and more from an observer place. And there's very few thoughts at all, except occasional questions. And the questions don't prompt you to pop back in your body. It's the thoughts of,
Yeah.
attempting to manipulate that do.
So we have that in common, which is unusual. I've done like, I don't know, 160 podcast interviews or whatever. I have never met anyone like you that has been so open about it up front and that we have this conversation. That's not something I usually share with people, but that
Well,
is
thank
part
you
of
so
my,
much. I'm honored that you do, and you feel comfortable enough to do so.
it's
And
part
it's
of my
those kinds of
experience.
things that we do need to share because others are having them, and they're, probably scared and frightened and don't know who to talk to, and maybe even institutionalized because of it.
Absolutely. Back to my
How do we? How did you get through that? What did you find, and especially what else? Your grandfather gave you that initial
yeah.
tasty tidbit. How did that play out over your youth?
My mom when part of the reason why we came to the United States, got cancer. This is back in the 70s, and in Greece especially, and there was almost like a death sentence. And
Hmm.
my mom was love personified. She was loved, or rather beloved, by both men and women, and she was just emanated love, and I felt like I grew up in a home from her that I felt unconditionally loved. And she lived long enough, and she fought it until I was the age of 22. And I mean, she really fought it, and she lived the life. Even when at the very, very end, she has a little cane and she's dancing on the tables. And anyway, I graduated from UCLA. My brother's getting his master's at UCLA at the same time, and she's too sick now to come to the graduation, right?
Hmm.
And we go back to the hospital, and we walk in cap and gown, and she looks at both of us and she said, "You know what? This is what I've lived for. I know you guys are going to be okay." And after that, she didn't last too many months after that, and she passed away. But she made a statement to me. The last words she said to me on her deathbed were these: "Don't worry about me. I'm going to be okay. I just want you to be happy." And that was this a second very profound statement that, and of course, for the first year, I was devastated. Like my whole world was crushed completely. I was depressed. Like I didn't want to get out of bed for the first year after my mom died. I was lost. Even though I was 22 and college graduate, I was lost. But after a year, something snapped in me, and I'm like, Mama was right. I just need to be happy. I like best way to honor her really is to seek happiness and wellness and so on. And
Right.
that's when I went back to school and got my master's and my PhD and all that stuff. So her statement, it's kind of funny that I became the happiness doctor. Like she planted that seed again, like this
Kind of funny,
October.
but not, right? It was like, here's your destiny. You don't really know you're going to fulfill it yet. And yet here's the seed.
And you know why it's timely? Because this October 1st will be 40 years from the day she passed away. 40 years I've been
Mm.
without my mom, and it's, I miss her every day, and I'm so grateful for her.
Imagine.
I,
Being
I'm very
adopted,
grateful for her.
both my parents have passed, and when Dad passed in 2013, Christmas Eve morning, um, my son called me to tell me to call family and find out. And so I did. And later that morning, though, it was really interesting. Um, they were in Indiana, and I'm living in Arizona, Phoenix area. And I feel him hug me. And I knew it was him. And it was just an amazing, just lost it. Because I threw my arms around him. And my girlfriend at the time says, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Dad just showed up to hug me." And I would just bawling my head out. And I didn't realize just how much I was connected with him. Now I'm Cancer, he's Piscean, didn't realize at the time, water signs, just this, but we had this telepathic connection throughout my entire life that was just uncanny. And he was a 32nd degree Mason. So I was schooled in the way, and was a part of DMLA when I was younger, and I got the 7 cardinal virtues and lived my life that way. And yet there was this, kind of like you, I was gone. There was this emptiness and longing that I had for quite some time, and I was at that point then by myself, and yet I got through it. And then Mom just passed away last October. She'd had dementia for over a decade and didn't know me for the last 5 years. I went back to her funeral, and I'm thinking, okay, I'm gonna speak up about, Dad, because I didn't get to speak at his funeral, and I started talking about her, and I thought I was calm, cool, and collected and composed, and I turned to look at her, and I just, again, the feeling of gratitude and honor and unconditional love that they had for me growing up was just, it was amazing. And I digress. So back to you.
Oh, sure.
In this distance that you felt, how did that sense of becoming the happiness person, the go-to guy, how did that come about, and what was the process from an internal place, first of all, of how you came to that choice?
You know, First of all, my belief is that we're all graduates from the University of Adversity,
Mm,
all of us. And
I love that. Yeah.
the older we get, the greater we get, the higher the degrees, right? Because we've experienced all kinds of things. Initially you lose you lose loved ones, grandparents, parents, sometimes siblings, sometimes your significant other, your spouse, God forbid, a child. You have economic and financial strain from, professional setbacks, illnesses of all kinds of, so we experience that. And
And yet they all had gifts.
exactly. Oh, you're speaking my language. Because and of course one of the keys to happiness is gratitude. We all know that, to have an attitude of gratitude and so on. And that's easy when things are going well. The question is, can you have gratitude when you're in the midst of the adversity? And, one of my role models and somebody I look up to is Nelson Mandela, who very wisely said that in life, either you win or you learn. And the greatest lessons in my own personal life have not come from my wins. They come from the setbacks.
Well, yeah, the wins only confirm what you already know to be true.
Right.
It's what you don't know, which a lot of us, we don't know what we don't know. And yet, in those adverse situations, when we can have the gratitude for it, and I like that you bring that up. My morning meditations, I do a 4-direction thing with thank yous, with gratitude. And what I focus on are those things that are challenging and being grateful for them. And of course, the gratitude for all the other is already in place. And having that additional has really made a huge difference in being able to meet the demands of life and living and showing up and being happy
Right.
without challenges. I mean, I'm just kind of like you. It's a natural happiness. It just occurs. And, it's that smile on your face that makes everybody else wonder what you're up to.
I mean, even my mom's passing, which was obviously a life-defining event, and it taught me empathy with all my patients that I used to see as a clinical psychologist in private practice. The pain, loss, and so on. I could really relate on a very deep and profound level. Now, would I rather have my mom still be around, or have seen our kids grow up and seen kids, grandkids, and great grandkids? Of course, but that's not how life was. And I know, and I've always had this belief that at some point when it's my time to transition over to the other side, the first person I'm going to see is her, and I'm going to give her a big, big hug. And I can't wait to see her. And I'm not afraid of death at all. Honestly, I'm like,
well, this brings up another question. Dr. Jeffrey Mishlove, I got to know him and spent some time with him, did several interviews with him on New Thinking Aloud. And this was prior to him winning a $500,000 award from the Robert Bigelow Foundation for the proof of life after death. Phenomenal. Now, for me, the veil has never been there. When I know someone, I can picture their face, look into their eyes, have the communication, and then there's evidence that shows up that was real. Do you experience any of that, or have you even considered that that's a possibility? Because being
I've
human,
experienced
we really don't have boundaries.
I've experienced significant times, and I'm glad that you use the word veil, because that's how I see it.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes the veil gets very, very thin, and you can almost reach across and connect with loved ones or others on the other side. You talked about the voice, because I think that's a big discussion, the inner voice.
Mm-hmm.
So at least for the last 35 years, that voice, and sometimes I speak to religious groups, sometimes I speak to obviously non-denominational or secular groups and so on. So I will say this, whatever you call that voice, I can call it the Holy Spirit, the Holy Ghost, your intuition, your higher self. I don't care what you call it. It's something that is very close to me for the last 35 years. It speaks to me, whether it's the voice of God or my own higher self, or something in between. And it has spoken to me for 35 years, crystal clear, Zen. It's always short. It's never anything really long.
Yeah, it doesn't have to belabor the point because it's all simple and succinct.
Absolutely. And it's one of the few absolutes in life, which is this. Every time I've listened to that voice and acted on it, it has always worked out. But I'm not a perfect human being. There have been plenty of times, especially when I was younger, when you hear the voice and you ignore it. And I've always paid the price for that, and when I was younger, because I was
the cosmic Cuba for.
Yeah, I used to ask why. Like I would get the message, and then I would ask. Now, as I've gotten older, and I trust it 1,000%, I don't ask why anymore. I don't need to know why. Just do it, and look.
And then the answer becomes obvious. It's like Rilke says, with asking questions, allowing life to give you the answers. It does.
It does.
You can't, expect things immediately, because it's the life experience that offers the answer, not the intellect.
Exactly.
Now, do you find when you have that, when you hear that voice, what's going on in your body? And the reason I'm asking that is there's an ancient philosophy, indigenous as such, in a three brain scenario, the gut, the heart, and the head, and the gut's the first brain, the heart's the second brain, the head's the third brain, and that we ought to be processing in that order because the gut is where we connect vibratorially to the energy, the frequencies of everything. And then we distill it, decide whether kind of the Taoist approach is a desirable or undesirable heart level. And then we can make better choices as to how to interact or what we choose to, or how we choose to behave or take action towards with that intellect that we have that's for that. It's designed to do that. But we tend to take that information or what we think to be true, our belief system, if you will, and shove it into our body and wonder why we have disease. But back to the original question, what do you sense in your body when this voice appears, or have you
and I'm not
that self-examining?
I wish I could say that I'm not as connected to my body. More so lately than I was before. I was kind of disconnected from my body. I hear it in my heart. And then, like you said, very much the heart kind of, and then you get to the mind of them.
Oh, the resonance, right? That's the desirable aspect of it, right?
So just for complete transparency with you, I'm just learning to learning to listen to my body. And it's really been the last 2 or 3 years. It really happened as a result of the pandemic when I actually took some time away from all the crazy, and I got in, and I went internal. It was the first time because I'm always out there taking care of everybody else, and I love doing it. And I hadn't done a lot of that self-reflection to say, you know what is it that you truly want to do? Yes, and I'm very good at taking care of other people, but when are you gonna actually take some time with Elia and get to know him better in that sense? So
But you know,
it's relatively
this
new.
was the pandemic. What a silver lining, right? I felt this from the get-go. I even turned to my wife at the day we went on lockdown, and I said, you know, I really hope that the obsession on self-hygiene and sequestration will get people to turn inward, self-examine, and figure out who they are, what they really want to do in life, and then pursue that. Because this gives us, you know, the behavior mod, right? You taught to be, you know, another level of the obsession on self-hygiene, right? Especially during the pandemic. Well, what's that going to do? That eventually trickles inward. And this is what's happened for you and many others. Unfortunately, not the entire world, and we've still got some room to grow. I'll put it that way. And yet, as you have just acknowledged, that's what happened for you, and I'm just so thankful.
But there's more that happened actually, because
no doubt,
in March of 2020, just as the pandemic was hitting New York and ground zero, kind of. March 15th, which is kind of a symbolic date, Julius Caesar, Shakespeare, beware the Ides of March 15th. Right. I downloaded, I kid you not, I was sitting right here, and the voice said to me, Elia, you need to get a book out about the pandemic because there's a mental health tsunami coming.
Yeah.
Now, this is early on, and you need to help people, and you need to get it out in 45 days. Now, at that point, I did look out, and I'm like, what the heck? My first book took 40 years to write. How am I going to get a book out in 45 days? It's absurd. But the next morning, March 16th, I called my best friend and, writing partner, said, listen, this is what I downloaded. I need to get this book out. I cannot do it on my own. Will you help me? And I kid you not, for the next 45 days, Coach Khan and I did nothing else but write, focus. And in May of 2020, this book came out, which was the first book in the world to market about the pandemic, right? How do we know? And it's not like, the greatest book in the world, but we needed to get something out practical. How can we help people navigate through the upcoming challenges? And what's really interesting, because initially we wrote it for the common, men and women in the world to help them out. What we didn't anticipate was that organizations were going to reach out to us for help. And the very first one was July of that same year, Bank of America out of New York remember New York at the time was ground zero.
Right.
And the morgues were full. People were dying left and
Yeah,
right.
for the
I
second
have
time.
and I have family in New York. Exactly. It was rough. I live in Colorado, so they hadn't fully come this way. And they're like, we have 1,000 employees in New York City. They're all working remote right now because everything was shut down, like lockdown, hard lockdown.
Mhm.
But they're suffering from PTSD. They're suffering from depression. They're suffering from anxiety. They've lost loved ones. Some of them are sick themselves, and they're so full of fear. We don't know what to do. Can you help us? And I'm like, sure. So I did, a kind of a presentation right here. I wish I couldn't travel anywhere,
Right.
and it just, and I got to tell you, both of the books that I've written, I wrote them from my heart, not as a PhD. I speak like I'm talking to you right now, like practical, that's it, not highfalutin academia stuff, which
Right.
is, boring to death. Anyway, and it must have hit home because when he was finished, the lady that invited me, and she gave me a beautiful testimonial on my website. She goes, "This is going to become available to all 200,000 employees of Bank of America throughout the country because you gave us practical tools and tips of how do we navigate this at the time was crisis, but the challenges that we face, and how can we maintain, or can we even maintain our happiness, our engagement, our purpose? Is that doable?" I'm like, absolutely, it's doable, but you got to do certain things on a
Right. There's a
consistent.
discipline involved.
Absolutely, yeah. Yes.
And that's, I think, the challenge that most have is that in America especially, we don't have that much training and discipline other than the intake of data and regurgitation to pass tests.
It's funny you use that word because I never considered myself as a disciplined human being. I'm kind of free spirit and so on. But my wife says, when you put your mind to something, you're actually very disciplined. And I have to go back to my early youth. I was a really good swimmer. In Greece, I was 20-time national champion on the national team,
Oh,
Junior Olympics in the United States. So that kind of the athlete in me way back then. She goes, something happens to you and something snaps. And if you put your, because normally I'm a little ADD, I'm a little distracted. I'm like, and I don't want to be that disciplined. But it, it if something that I'm passionate about, I guess it automatically clicks in and it happens without
it
me
does.
recognizing it that I'm
Well,
disciplined about it.
as evidence, the voice, the message, the time frame, you know how we love deadlines and commitments, right? So that natural part of you that is connected is supremely disciplined, even though we don't necessarily recognize it because you follow the subtle signs. And it's those subtle signs that we develop the discipline to pay attention to
I
and to
don't think of
follow.
myself as a discipline. Like if you were to say three attributes to describe you, but that's not one of them. But actually, I am more than I think I am.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, we don't recognize that because ultimately it happens so naturally and it begins to flow in it with us. And then after a while, it is no longer second nature, it becomes first nature. And at that point, we don't feel like it's a discipline. Yet to
You're
everybody
right then.
else,
I think
it's
you're
like, how
right.
do you do that? Right?
Yeah, I think you're right about that because I just don't see myself that way, but it's true. Everything you said is true. Yeah. So anyway.
I'm glad it resonated. Yeah. So anyway, that's what my birth mother used to say.
Okay, so
That was
anyway.
one of the things that the patterns that my wife recognized when we went to meet her. It's like, and I do the same thing. So anyway, and it was hilarious when it happened, as you might imagine. So in this moving into the pandemic and out of, what do you think is, or how do you perceive maybe, or your, see, I have a challenge to ask questions
Yeah.
between perception and perspective, because our perspective drives our perception, and we don't often recognize that. So from the perspective that you were at in that happiness place and the knowledge and wisdom that you had to share, what did you find most challenging to be able to present that and um, find the clarity in the voice and the writing that you guys
Yeah.
put?
You know what's really interesting? First of all, what happened in that March is like I'm a keynote speaker, speak internationally, so on. All my speaking engagements when the pandemic first hit in March actually got canceled within a week. So my entire work got gone. And I had no plans to write a book, until the voice told me to do that. There were no plans to do that. You know what's really fascinating? I had to switch, obviously, to speak in this, I learned about Zoom. I'm not a technical person at all. I didn't even know what Zoom was before that. But you know what's really funny? I spoke to more people during that year here than I have in my entire life. Like 50, 60,000 people all over the globe who were about this. And my message was, I felt there's some kind of giant finger from the sky came down on humanity and pressed the pause button.
Yeah.
And as a result of that, and I'm not minimizing the losses and the deaths and all that stuff by any means. I'm not minimizing.
I understand that there was a lot of tragedy involved.
Right. But I'm not a fear-based person. It's just not, I've never been that way. So, and I wasn't being flippant about, whether you should wear a mask or not. It was very controversial. They were and people were so vehement about that. And I would say, you know what, if I have to, I will, but I just, I'm not just, and I get pushback live, like this. People say, well, what if you get sick? I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
And then what? Well, what if you get really sick? I'm like, okay, and then what? Well, what if you die? And I'm like, and then what? Now, I'm not saying that I want to die right now. I have lots to live for, kids and grandkids, so on. But my point being, I can't live in a fear-based society. I don't buy into it.
Right. We didn't either. My wife and I, it's like, how dare they tell us what to do and what to wear and how to behave, because we're valid, we're
and I'm not saying I'm anti-science.
adults.
I'm not saying that at all. I understand all that stuff. I just cannot live in fear. That's the bottom line.
Yeah.
So the pause button, coming back to that, has given humanity, because it has never happened before that, time to reflect and to say this, is this the life that I want to be living? Yes or no? And millions of people have made the decision, no, I don't want to live my life that way. I don't want to be part of the rat race. I want to spend more meaningful time with people that I care and I love the most. So I think there's a spiritual awakening happening. And I'm involved in a lot of groups internationally, not just in the United States, Europe.
I noticed that within a few months after the lockdown came, there was all kinds of virtual groups popping up. I belong to many of them.
Sure.
These kinds of conversations of, okay, what do we do? How do we learn how to work together better? What kind of skill sets do we have that we can share and collectively collaborate and make things better for all of us? Because it seemed like the major realization was that, oh, I do have agency and I can choose and I can make my life better in ways without harming others.
Absolutely. And my message kind of towards the end of my talks, usually, even then, was, in the end, acts of kindness, reach out. And again, I got pushback from people say, well, what am I, my brother's keeper? This is during the lockdown.
Yeah.
And I'm like, no, I said, you're not your brother's keeper,
Yeah.
Your mother's keeper, and your sister's keeper, and your neighbor's keeper, and the homeless person down the street, because in the end, we're all brothers and sisters. And
right.
we're all
and this is ancient philosophy.
I
right?
know.
My opening, namaste. The divine in me recognizes the divine in you. That's Sanskrit, 15,000 years old. In la ketch, Mayan, means I am another you. Equally as old, if not more so, or maybe slightly. And then
Sure.
you've got the Vedas. We talked a little bit about my spiritual awakening before we came on. One of the things that I found that explained it to me so that I could have some corroboration, because when you have that kind of weird shit go on in your life, you're looking for some kind of reference, right? Well, I found it in the Vedas, and the Vedas basically 15,000 years old, written in Sanskrit originally. They say that we're all divine threads connected to the source and that we're capable of God consciousness. Well, what is that? That's pure love.
Absolutely. And I had a spiritual experience that I had a couple of takeaways. And this happened in January with a couple of facilitators that I had a journey of my own, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I experienced is the universe is so infinite and yet so intimate.
Yes.
And the facilitator, like, what did you just say? I'm like, I don't know. What did I just say? Like, I had my eyes closed. I'm visualizing. I'm like, yeah, it's almost like, God is so infinite and yet so intimate, depending on how we relate. And they're like, wow, that's beautiful. Nobody's ever actually said it that way. I'm like, you know, and then going back to what you just said, I said, every fiber of my, and they told me afterward, like, you would keep repeating this, every fiber. And I said, yes, every fiber of my being is love. Every fiber, every fiber. And it was this amazing experience to actually feel on a cellular level. And I'm, fully conscious. It's not like I was like, hallucinating or anything. I was like fully conscious. And it was the most beautiful, beautiful experience. And that's why I'm not afraid of the other side. We're all going to cross over through the veil that you talked about. And
Maybe.
well, yeah, well, who knows? I'm assuming that there's
Well, there are those who've,
yeah.
come in the past, one in particular, but there are others that have actual written documentation of taking their bodies with them. So it's kind of
My
interesting.
Yeah, my feeling about that was that when the time comes, it's going to be the most beautiful experience ever, and it's all going to be love, and we come from love, and we return to love, and so yeah, I think
I
that the
wonder if
whole
it has
thing,
anything to do with our belief system, right? In believing that we're born and we die and we move on, and yet from an eternal standpoint, there's this, like we were talking about, cosmic consciousness being condensed into form. We're just unaware, and all of us are that. We've just forgotten or haven't given the experience to learn it, or the adversity to learn it,
right,
right?
right,
And in that, then there's this infinite possibility of how we can express ourselves and become co-creators of the reality that we truly all desire, which simply is based, in my opinion, in loving and being loved.
right, and that's it. It really is that simple. Um, you know what? The other funny thing that happened during that experience, it lasted all night long. At
Mhm.
some point, this wonderful facilitator lady, who's both a shaman, but also has a medical background, so she blends both East and West,
Sure.
and somebody that I've referred a lot of people to, and she's healed, helped facilitate healing with so many people. At some point, I'm like, her name is Melanie, and I just adore her, and she's like a daughter to me, basically. I said, I love you so much, and I'm so proud of you for everything that you've done, because she's been through a lot in life, and yet she has used all that to be this wonderful human being. You know what happened? I'm talking to her, and at some point that message looped, and it went like this, and like, I love you so much, and I'm so proud of you, to myself. And I'm like, wait a minute, I'm talking to you. How did that happen? And the next day she explained to me, says, Elia, because you are love. Yes, I got the message that you love me and you're so proud of me for all the things I'm doing and so on. But you kept looping it. It kept coming back to you, and your face was going, wait a minute, I'm talking to you. How did that happen? And she goes, it was this amazing spiritual experience
Well,
that I had.
absolutely. And I would, let's unpack that a little bit more. It's, excuse me, been my understanding that whenever we are speaking to another in any other way than love, we're talking to ourselves. Something that is awry within us that we're expressing so that we can actually hear ourselves. And it's like the idea of counseling, right? It's not the questions that are asked, it's the answers that we hear ourselves give that we can further process because we're hearing ourselves speak.
Can I
Now,
give you an example of that? Like what happened to me, like specifically about that during this journey, right, that I had.
mhm,
And part of it was for me to heal some, old wounds and all that stuff, look at my younger self and so on. When I
sure,
was about 15 years, I was a very sensitive boy. And mama's boy, I was so close to my mom, was sensitive. And my dad was a Korean veteran, tough Greek man, smoked and drank and all that stuff.
right.
And one day, he's getting regard, and they were in love with my mom, and they had a great relationship. But I was crying about, I don't remember why I was crying about, and I was holding up to my mom, and he turns to me with a look and he says, "You're too sensitive." And then it cut me to the core. Like, yeah, like it hurts so bad because I knew that I was sensitive, you
Right.
know. And of course, I got to show up like I got to be tough, like a Greek man, and I
Well, and
toughen
the
up.
question of, well, why am I so sensitive comes up too.
I know, but back in the day, I had to show my dad that I was tough, right? I was like,
Right.
but that was a very traumatic event for me, and I realized at some point why my dad was saying that. He was like, life is tough, and you can't be that sensitive if you want to survive. You got to toughen up, kid. Fast forward now to a couple of months ago, I have this spiritual experience, and I kind of go back to that event in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And guess what the download was? My dad, in spite of all the bravado you saw outside, was actually a very sensitive man.
Sure.
But he grew up in that generation where you didn't say I love you and you didn't say anything. And he didn't have the skill set to deal with his own sensitivity. So when he said to me, "You're too sensitive," he was actually judging himself. He had nothing to do with me.
Right. Exactly. That's my point.
That's your point.
That
That's
was
why
my
I said
point.
that. Yeah,
Right.
exactly. And
And
I was able to
my dad was
welcome,
the same way.
you know,
And is that also part of the evolution of our, let's, for lack of a better, planetary consciousness, right? Where we are moving from this constriction of emotion in order to perform to a place where that emotion now is more present, especially with men. We're taught, you can't talk about your feelings. Well, why not? Right? I mean, we have feelings just like women do. We just stuff them.
exactly.
Now, how do we bring that about? And of course, that's a process, right? Because when that emotional door opens up, it's usually pretty wild and untamed. And words and things come out, and it just gets kind of wonky. And as we learn how to navigate that better, and of course, having a willing partner that sees the process going on too, we don't always have that. I'm fortunate that my wife's able to. Perhaps it would seem like you do too.
Absolutely.
And yet, there are those who, when that process is taking place, and I think this is one of the reasons why it doesn't take place, is we get this immediate adversarial energy that is really hard to overcome once that trigger in the other is pulled, because it's already been pulled in us, right? And so there's this quagmire that we're all swimming around in the mud and trying to get clean. How do you think is a way to move through that effectively that you've found in your work?
First of all, when I had that experience, I was able to see my dad in a different light, forgive him immediately, and understand where he was coming from, and say, "Man, I wish, because I'm very much in touch with my feminine side, always have been, and
Mhm.
that's part of my sensitivity too. And I've known that as to be a strength. Despite what happened when I
Absolutely.
was 15, I'm like, this is really who I am. I'm sensitive. I'm open. I'm vulnerable. I get hurt as a result of that sometimes, but I don't want to shut down and protect myself and keep the light out, because when you protect all that stuff, you might be safe, quote unquote, but you're leaving out the most beautiful part of life. So I, in raising boys especially, in raising them to be the divine masculine, and they're world citizens. What I love about we have behind you planetary citizens, we feel like we raise our kids to be world citizens too. So I really relate to what you have behind you. Is it's okay to be sensitive as a man, even in today's society. It's okay, and as a matter of fact, that may be even one of your greatest strengths as a man. And
Absolutely. Absolutely.
so I have fully embraced it, and years ago, not now. I've embraced that years ago, and this is who I am, and that's and I like it, and I'm
Mhm.
comfortable being that way. I know it's not society doesn't really promote that, but
Well, how do we, speaking of, we know this because of our own experience, primarily how it works for us and the benefits and the joy and happiness we experience from that. It's not all, fun and glorious and all that kind of stuff, and cancel the but, and in those places when we're dealing with others who have been triggered, it gives us the opportunity to at least acknowledge they've been triggered and explore that from a loving place and an understanding place, as opposed to being adversarial and telling them they're wrong and trying to project what we think onto them, which is usually what happens in those kinds of situations. How do we avoid that from?
And I think that you and I, or this conversation, to make it quote unquote normal, that it's okay to be this way. I think young men, need examples of that to say, hey, this is what the divine masculine looks like.
Right.
Loving, it's kind, it's not toxic, it's giving, it's forgiving, and of course, forgiveness is a big part of one's happiness.
Now, that doesn't mean we don't hold people accountable.
No, not at all.
Just the opposite, I think, occurs in most. Because of that, we're able to hold people to a higher level of accountability. Do you find that to be true?
Yeah, in my experience working with people, like people are very hard on themselves,
Right.
and they don't know how to forgive others, and they certainly don't know how to forgive themselves.
Well, in your background, neuroscience, right? That there's the neurogeeks say we got 70,000 thoughts a day. Well, I would imagine probably 2/3, maybe even 3/4 of those are self-deprecating. And how do we then either not shut it off, just be able to see that, recognize it, and then make other choices as to what thoughts come next?
Zen, I've been really fortunate that self-forgiveness has always come very easily to me.
Mm-hmm.
But I know that's unusual. I mean, I know a lot of my loved one, my family, they really struggle, and clients and patients struggle with that.
Mm-hmm.
But self-forgiveness is the ultimate act of self-compassion, if you think about it.
Yes. Well, self-love, right? It's
exactly.
the unconditional love applied to self.
It's just a lot of people don't know how to do it. They're uncomfortable. They just don't know. And I actually teach that. I have a course that actually I teach that to people. This is how you do it, step by step by step. Forgiveness equals freedom, right? That's the other part. Or like Gandhi once said, forgiveness is the attribute of the strong.
Right.
But forgiveness equals freedom. You don't even have to share that with somebody else that you've forgiven them.
Well, Castaneda, when Don Juan taught him that the sealing of the egg, right?
I remember that.
Oh, yeah. So where you are able to recognize all the emotional cords that you have attached to everything and cut them all, because that's where the guilt and the frustration and all those kinds of.
When I read that, I was 15 years old when I read Castaneda. All the books. I was just like, I couldn't, like, they spoke to me even as a teenager in Los Angeles.
Me too. That's what I found.
Yeah.
Amazing stuff. And there's so many like that we find, the books, the teachers, the knowledge bases, all of that kinds of materials. And yet it's still the application of it. We can understand it. We can really, as Heinlein might say, grok what's going on. And yet the application of it is where we stumble a lot. Is there something, maybe in your lessons and your teaching, a simple offering that begins that process of at least acknowledging what is, and then offering an alternative of how to process and move beyond?
Yeah, I mean, I just love that comment. You and I could probably speak for hours, and I know our time. I love the conversation. I think in life, it doesn't matter what we know, honestly. What matters is what do we do with what we know?
Mm-hmm.
Moving into action, that's really what matters. We all know. I mean, deep down inside, we pretty much all know.
Therein is the discipline.
Or is it discipline, or is it the courage to take action? It could be both, I guess.
Well, it's a discipline. First of all, to make the choice. That's the primal, because we do have choice. And we are the only ones who do. The individual choice to go that direction. And then the discipline comes in the follow-up.
I don't know if everyone recognizes that.
If they did, we wouldn't be in the shape that we are now, would we?
Right.
It's the retraining that's or the re-education that's taking.
But my partner and co-author and I, what we discovered when we wrote the book is that when people are facing challenges, they usually fall into 4 categories. And the first one we would like to call the victim. which is, why is this happening to me? As if it's only happening to them, not 8 billion other people.
Right.
The second one is the critic. So the critic basically will blame, get angry, frustrated, mad, and will blame everybody. The government, the this, the that, their spouse, their kids, their boss, right? They're just into blame. The third one is what we call the bystander, basically the deer with the headlights look. That sometimes people are so overwhelmed by the changes and the challenge they're facing that they're frozen in fear.
Yeah, they just lock up.
Yeah, they lock up, exactly. They don't know what to do, right? And then the fourth, of course, is what we call the navigator, who navigates through life successfully and is able to accomplish all kinds of things.
Well, that's the one that I think it was the second one that you said, the finger pointer,
Yes.
right? You got three coming back at you. We
Yeah.
missed that. This is the thing, one of the things my dad told me when I was young. He says, you ever point your finger or try to call somebody out, you got three coming back at you. You better have three solutions in hand or keep your mouth shut.
But the thing is that it's not like Zen and Elia are navigators and the rest of the folks are like critics.
No, we all are.
Fearful.
Capable.
No, all of us have all four of those inside of ourselves because we're human beings. So from time to time, if you feel like the victim, it's okay. Feel your feelings, process through them, and then pivot and become a navigator.
Mhm.
If you want to criticize or you even if you're right about something, what good does it do if you blame the government for the next 6 months or 6 years? If you want to vent and get out of your system, do it for 30 minutes and then pivot and become a navigator, right? Because all three of those, first of all, none of them take personal responsibility. I blame for me or I'm frozen in fear, right? Where
Right.
navigators are all about personal responsibility. And they one of the things that defines them is that they do take action, right? Navigators,
Compelled.
yes, navigators practice massive self-care, meaning they do take care of themselves physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. They have a positive attitude. They're flexible and adaptable, unlike others who are stuck in their ways. And, when people get older, usually like, well, this is who I am. I'm not going to change now. When I talk, especially to groups of younger people, I'm like, the older I get, the more flexible I want to be. I want to be even more flexible and adaptable and learn from you.
And maturity brings that kind of opportunity where you recognize, oh, this is actually the best way to be.
Right. So people who are flexible and adaptable are able to navigate through challenges. I kind of use this analogy of the oak tree and the palm tree. The oak tree is this massive, beautiful, and majestic tree, 100,
Mhm.
beautiful tree, stable and solid, which actually works when things are going well in life. But when there's a storm and there's enough rain and saturation on the ground and enough wind, what happens to oak trees? They come crashing down on people, cars, and homes. On the flip side, the palm tree, which is exotic and tropical, at the peak of the storms, and I'm watching about the storms of life now, at the peak of the storm, it bends. Sometimes you will bend parallel to the ground. But when the storm passes, just like every storm does pass and the sun comes out, guess what happens to palm trees? Whoop, they raise up. And they're stronger than they were before because they dug in deep underground their roots to
No
hold on
erectile
to their life.
dysfunction there, is there?
So people have said, that's a cute story, Dr. Elia. We like it, be a palm tree, don't be an oak tree. But what does an oak tree look or sound like in human form? And I'm like, that is a great question. An oak tree says, this is how I've done things for the last 30, 40 years. I'm not going to change that. This is who I am. Take it or leave it. And oak trees, when things are going well, like I said, they're stable and they're good. But when there's a crisis or a challenge, fall, break. Where people who are flexible, like navigators, are able to recognize and say, okay, that didn't work. Let me be, it's not what I want. Let me be open. Let me surrender. Let me give in. Let me lean, not get defensive, but lean into it. And magical things happen when you do that.
Absolutely. It's, I love how you brought out the navigator. This is probably not going to be surprising. One of my most recent books is called Navigating Holistic Growth, the
I love
Servant
it.
Leader's Guide. And
Well, I may want to read that. Tell me the title again.
Navigating Holistic Growth, the
Okay.
Servant Leader's Guide.
I love it. That's my next book. I love it. Yeah, and we're all navigating through life to the best of our abilities, but until you realize that you have a choice, I don't have to stay victim mode for the rest of my life, or critic, or fearful. I can do it for a little bit, but that doesn't serve me after a while. Let me pivot and become a navigator.
Right.
And that's when
Well,
choice
and
comes.
you're going to feel those natural emotions that are going to put you in one of those places in the moment when when an event occurs.
Of course.
Then the discipline comes in as, okay, now where am I going to go with this? And then taking it into that navigator realm.
I mean, I can't tell you how many people I know personally who are keynote speakers, public speakers, motivational speakers, and so on, that when the pandemic happened and shut down, they refused to do anything on Zoom. It was below them. And not, no, I know it's hard to believe, but I know personally people that actually ended up taking their own lives because they lost their entire practice, their entire livelihood, and so on, because they refused to be flexible. I'm like, I'm not a technical person. I didn't know Zoom, but I decided to try something different because I didn't have any other choice. So as a navigator, I'm like, what can I do then?
Sure.
I
I had a
gotta
client
cross
did
my
this.
audience, you know?
She did the same thing. She was is a painter, and she would open country music shows, large ones. I mean, she was really um, in demand, and she would paint a picture of some famous artist or someone in history while the music played as the opening act. Well, when the pandemic hit,
Gone.
done. She says, "Oh my God, what am I going to do?" And so we worked together. And I said, "Okay, well, what's your dream? What would you love to be able to do?" "Well, I'd love to have my own show." And 6 months later, she did,
During the pandemic.
during the pandemic.
That's because
So,
she's flexible and adaptable. She's looking at other venues and other ways of doing.
and being willing to say, okay, that door closed, what one is open,
it. Exactly.
and how can I create one to open? Because that's our true capacity as co-creators is to actually do what we love and create ways for us to receive the income for doing so.
Right.
And that's been a real challenge for a lot of people. You know, it used to be the old woo-woo thing. It's like, oh yeah, do what you love, the money will flow or follow.
Right.
And
Yeah,
you know, you hear that over and over and over again, and yet it so rarely happens.
I know.
And yet it can. And now there's so many more who are following that, I don't want to say prescriptive, although it is,
Sure.
methodology, right? That then are now, with remote working, I mean, you know, the opportunity, hey, I don't have to go into the office. I can do my own thing. I can take my skill set and apply it elsewhere, have more fun, more freedom, be closer to my family and friends, and still be financially set as they were before. Maybe even better without the stress.
You know that's really funny that you say that. In the middle of the pandemic, I decided I had just gotten my Greek passport, which I didn't have a Greek passport for 50 years. And
Yeah.
the pandemic hits, and I take off because the only way to get to Greece is, if you had a passport, get in without wife, without kids, without anybody. And I went there for 7 weeks for the first time in my life by myself. This is where I truly found myself.
Hmm.
And when I came back, people said, "Well, what did you do for 7 weeks?" And you said, "You know what I did? I swam. Our home is next to the water. I swam twice a day. I got bronzed. I got kind of hedonistic life. I I ate out every night because I don't cook for myself at a local tavernas, and I never ate alone. Now think about that. For 49 nights, I was always with somebody else, sometimes double booked, and we had deep conversations. I walked everywhere. I went to the grocery store or to the got my fresh bread every day, just walking. I was close to nature. I connected with people deeply, even friends that I've had for 50 years. And I came
Mhm.
back to and I told my wife, I'm like, you know what? This is how I want to live my life, not full time. And since then, we're spending now 4 to 5 months in Greece/Europe and the other time here in Colorado. And people have said, when they've heard that, it's like, well, you're like really blessed or you're really lucky or you're like, and I'm like, maybe that part is true, but manifesting this life, I thought about it I meditated on it. I pondered it. I prayed about it in great detail. Like, this is how I want
In
to.
law of attraction terms, we'd call that I magnetized it.
Exactly. Exactly. And it was delayed by a couple of years because of COVID, obviously. But, the last couple
Well,
of
the
years,
universe sometimes takes a little while to formulate,
yeah, it didn't
our
happen overnight. But,
so
and I'm committed to this life. This is,
yeah,
that's how I want to live my life and in the best of both worlds. America, Greece, and so on.
sure.
It's a wonderful
Well, and
life.
the
I'm so
intention that
very
you put
blessed.
out, it's kind of like I see it as a tesseract, right? Where this morphing geometric, you're familiar with a tesseract. So we project our intention out as that leading edge of the tesseract. And the universe says, okay. And as what we desire begins to come towards us and is looking for us the same as we're looking for it, then the rest of us come and can embrace that and make it part of us. And I find it so replete in the simplicity of that activity. We rarely recognize how well that actually works.
And
Be
it
it
does work.
in weeks, months, years, sometimes even decades, because it may, your goal or your dream may be so large and so intentional that it takes the universe, many years to coordinate the people, places, and things to put in front of you for it to actually happen.
And it has happened. I mean, it took a couple of years, but that's okay. I mean,
Sure.
they needed to figure out how to make it happen. It has happened, and I'm so grateful for it. Because why? This goes back to being a sort of a digital nomad. You and I could be in Greece right now talking to you and having this interview.
Absolutely.
Honest, as long as I have access to this, that's so the world in a lot of ways have gotten a lot smaller,
Mhm.
and
Well, I
that's
talk to
beautiful
people in
and more
England,
intimate.
Spain, Germany, Argentina, Australia, South Africa. Then there's probably others, but it's opened my world up to
Right.
have these kinds of conversations with others and be able to share what we know that somewhere is going to resonate with another listener. It may only be one, it may be several. At this point, we're getting 10,000 or so views per video, so maybe that
Wow.
will have some kind of thank you activity, and it just you never know. As long as we can touch one person, however, we have to step up and be putting ourselves in a place to do so.
Absolutely. I know our time is getting close up. The one thing that I would share with your audience is, if it's a last little thing, is this: do not procrastinate your happiness. That's my lasting message to your viewers, because far too many people live with the philosophy or the when. In other words, when I'm in the right relationship, when I get married, when I have kids, when the kids grow up, when the kids
Right.
get married, when I retire, when I have enough money, when I have this. Forget all the wins. The beautiful thing about the pandemic is it erased all the wins. Live
Mhm.
your best life now. Don't procrastinate your happiness. And when you do that, you bless the lives of those around you too, because you're a shining example of white light, of love, of kindness, and compassion. That's why we need to live our best lives now, not when.
And if you need a little help with hand holding, you got guys like you and I and
Indeed.
others like us that you can reach out to,
Of
because
course.
we're pretty transparent and out there. All you got to do is a quick search and you'll find us.
Yes, and we're right here. So thank you for what a lovely conversation. It's like I had no idea how this is good. Beautiful. You're a lovely man. You have great energy about you, and you're so centered. You're like you're just like, man, you're there. You're there. And you've been doing this for a long time. It's beautiful to see. This is a very unusual actually interview, to be honest with you. And I loved it, every
I
minute of
tend to be that way. I'm a
it.
bit, well, my latest book, that I got to share this with you. Tom Power, he and Penny started Academy back in the early days of LinkedIn. They were the European competitor. Well, I got to know Tom. We've had some Zoom calls, and he and I, he was kind of ghosting me, unintentionally, of course, right? Because I know he's busy, but I had the opportunity to just kind of chide him a little bit on a LinkedIn post and about ghosting me. And he, of course, responds right away. We get involved in this conversation. We move it all over to WhatsApp, which I don't really care for, but I've had to learn how to use, kind of like Zoom.
Sure.
I love Zoom, by the way.
I do too.
And so next thing I know, he's sharing with me this book title, chapter titles, and a brief description of something that he had queried ChatGPT about for what my next book might look like. And it's called The Unconventional Conventionalist.
I saw that article. I saw that just before we got on the air.
It's just amazing how that all worked out. I used chat to query my old material and pull out some anecdotes and add to the points of order and give examples, and wrote the thing in a week and a half.
Get out. What? No.
Yeah.
Well, I thought 45 days are insane.
34th or 35th book. So I've learned to process. And I type really quick too.
That's incredible.
And yet with chat and that, I didn't have to go back and regurgitate and take the time to type. I could just pull the stuff out, put it in, edit it, and worry about not necessarily worry, but concerned with the rest of the text. And so it made it much easier to write. And just the fact that there were two who gathered in the space of love and honor for each other. And when you're in that place, amazing things can happen, such as the book's publishing, writing and publishing in a week and a half. It was just, it flowed.
Remarkable. It's remarkable. I know.
Yeah. And I'm so thankful for having the guts to chide him about being ghosted. Right, because I didn't want to offend, but I thought he might take it in stride. So that is just a wonderful example of how things can happen. It just randomly, that then it's like, oh, that feels like, yeah, that's the right thing to do. So I'm going to head that direction. The universe says, okay, here's all the other tools.
I really hope our paths cross again when I'm in Arizona next time, or if you're ever in Colorado, or Greece, I should say, because it's like, we got to get together and break some breads together one of these days.
Oh, that'd be wonderful. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
I would love that. And thank you so much for your time, your honor, your insight and wisdom that will impact a lot of people, as it already has and will continue. And thank you so much for being you.
Who else would I be?
Exactly. It's like Stuart Wilde, right? And be yourself. Everybody else is taken.
Right. Exactly. Thank you so much. Such a pleasure.
Thank you again, Elia. And namaste. And in la catch. And thank you for sticking with us for this episode of One World in a New World. I know you'll be happy with it. And I hope you'll come back and see us again. Thank you again. I'm Zen Benefiel, your host, and I'll see you next time.